Hi again, it's Doug Blunt here, your host for the Landscapes Masterclass Series. This is class number 8, and it's titled Special Water Effects, with the subtitle of Slow Shutters, Really Slow Shutters. Okay, so the whole idea here today is we want to get more artistic about your landscape photos, and we're going to do that with slow shutters. And so the idea is when you slow down your shutter on your camera, particularly when you're photographing water, like out in the Gulf or lakes or rivers, anytime you're photographing water, if you slow the shutter down, the water will take on a silky appearance depending on how slow your shutter is, and it gets silkier the longer you go. And also clouds that are streaking across the sky end up really soft and beautiful. But the cool thing is that while those things that are moving take on that ethereal effect, the things that are not moving, like rocks and so forth, are razor sharp. So you get this juxtaposition of moving soft things and razor sharp items, and it can really be special. We shall see here. So let's go ahead and take a look at some examples of slow shutters. Okay, so this first shot was taken at a half-second shutter, and at anywhere from 1/6 of a second to 1/2 of a second, I find to be really good shutter speeds for water that is sort of crashing. Like with these waves down here, at a 1/2 a second, you can still see detail kind of coming through the waves. As it throws forward and the water splashes, you get tracks of that white, which I think is really cool. My favorite shutter speed of all for streams to get this effect is 1/6 of a second, but anywhere between 1/6 and 1/2 a second, those are great shutter speeds for this type of thing with thrashing water. Okay, the next shot was taken at 6 seconds, and that's my dear wife posing down below with her iPhone on. We couldn't really hear each other, so I had to do this by arm commands. I'd hold my arm up. I was standing up on a bridge at Longboat Pass, and I would let her know when the exposure was starting and when it was ending. She was pretty patient with me, and I sure appreciated it. But at 6 seconds, you start to get this type of thing going on with the shore, which is really pretty. You still have detail in the water, but there were actually waves coming in here. It was kind of going in and out, but you end up at 6 seconds with something like this. It gets really soft. And at 6 seconds, you have to remember the sun is setting here, so it's moving, and you don't want to go too long in the setting sun because you will get the track of the sun moving. But at 6 seconds, you get nice soft water, and you get an intact sun. This third shot is at 8 seconds, and this was taken in the fog down at Bradenton Beach Pier on Anna Maria Island about maybe 2 weeks ago. We've had a lot of fog lately. This, again, is 8 seconds, a little bit longer. You still have pattern in the water. There were actually waves happening here, small ones, granted. The sailboats didn't move very much, fortunately. I had a chance to kind of do a full 8 seconds. There was a stiff wind coming into the boat, so they were pulling on their bow lines pretty hard, so they were staying pretty still. And it allowed me to take this shot in the fog. But you still have a little pattern in the water, although it's very soft and kind of artistic and beautiful. The next shot was taken at 20 seconds. This is down at the Shore Restaurant on Longboat Key. And you can see how really soft the water is getting here. There were waves out here. There were boats going through here and creating waves, and so I had to kind of wait for the waves to kind of die down, but it was still not smooth like this. And these clouds, you can see they're sort of like, they're very soft and ethereal. So this is 20 seconds. This is a look you'll get with 20 seconds. Now the boats weren't moving either that night, which was kind of cool. This was actually after the sun had set, and we were looking to the east, by the way, away from the sun. You get this tremendous bounce light on the opposite side of a sunset sometimes. So that's 20 seconds. And this is a full 30 seconds. This is out to the limit of your in-camera timer. You can go out to 30 seconds on your camera. And there were some people walking along the beach here that were just kind of a blur. I had to clone them out. And these guys were a little bit soft, so I had to kind of like clean up their edges with a technique, a halo technique that I taught in Landscapes 7. If you're interested in seeing how I did that, please visit video 7. But you get these beautiful, there were actually waves out here. I mean, it's crazy how soft it makes the ocean at 30 seconds. But again, you're at the limit of your camera timer. So if you go beyond this, you're onto a little hand timer, which is what we're going to talk about more here. These are called crepuscular rays, by the way, when the sun is below the horizon, which it was here. Yeah, those rays coming up are called crepuscular rays. My wife taught me that. I thought that was kind of interesting. Okay, so once you go to this point, if you want to go longer, and you're wondering what it would look like, say if you went out to 120 seconds, 2 full minutes, or even beyond that, it's possible to do when you're in a bow setting, which is what we're going to talk about next. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so this is the shot that we're going to do the 2-minute exposure on. This is a boat that got marooned on the sand in Palmasola recently, Palmasola Bay. And it's since been moved back to its anchor hold. But I figured what a beautiful opportunity to shoot the sunrise, which comes up right over here if I set my tripod up here in the water. So that's what I did. And but I knew I had to kind of have a plan first. So generally what I do is I'll go over to, well, I always do, I go to PhotoPills, which is my absolute go-to program for all kinds of creative, artistic photography where you're kind of working beyond normal means. You can learn so much from this program as far as your shot. So I go out to the planner, and basically once I'm in the planner, I'll go over to this little thing here, and I'll figure out what day I'm going to shoot, and you can spin this thing back and forth to get the date. Time is determined by what time the sunrise is, which is given you up here for that date. And so I knew I had to be out around 6:39 in the water, setting up, getting all my settings. And I also knew that if I put the pin down where the boat was, that the sun was going to be coming out this direction relative to the boat, which is really nice to know. So then the next thing is you can get your camera together and you head out to the scene. And this was the morning of February 11th at 6:39 approximately, and I kind of walked out in the water and set up my tripod right out here. And this is pre-dawn, and the first thing I did, I used a 24-70 Canon zoom lens for this particular procedure, which I learned, by the way, from Francesco Gola. And I'll put a link on the page here if you're interested in studying an hour's worth of masterclass on long exposure seascape photography. You should check his video out. It's wonderful, and he goes into very specific detail about the filters and so forth. You're going to see how I do it and what gear I use today. But if you want more information, go out to Francesco Gola's video on PhotoPills. So I set up my tripod. I zoom that lens into the composition that I sort of wanted. I knew these trees were going to be a problem on a 2-minute exposure because we had a pretty stiff wind coming from the south, coming this direction, and as a result, these trees were blowing pretty good. There were seagulls drifting around up here in turns, and there's a lot of dynamism. When you shoot these scenes, my tripod was actually getting buffeted by the waves while I was shooting in the 2 minutes, so rather interesting. But anyway, once you've figured out your focal length, you can take the next step and go back to PhotoPills and go over to the hyperfocal table, because we're going to work on focusing next. Okay, and in the hyperfocal table, these axes are movable, and I knew I'd be at f11. This is a great aperture for this type of photography, and I was at 40 millimeters on my composition for the focal length. So you get this little box here that tells you what your hyperfocal distance is. And the reason we use hyperfocal instead of focus stacking on these is because they're 2-minute exposures. You probably immediately understand what that means. You don't want to be doing multiple shots. The light's changing on you. But what you can do, once you have your 15-foot, 8-inch hyperfocal distance figured out, you can actually go down to augmented reality down here. And when you click that button, it takes you to a virtual scene. Just imagine that I'm standing in the bay there in the water, and so I line up my feet with the virtual feet, and then it tells you in that scene that you're in where your hyperfocal distance is. So let's say this is the bow of the boat at 15 foot 8 inches, and you know that from this. Then you can put your camera on manual focus, which is, I think, the way to do it, and then zoom in so you're in a really tight shot on that particular spot, that hyperfocal spot, and get your focus really dialed in really well. And then leave your camera on manual focus so that you don't inadvertently adjust the focus. Once you have it set at hyperfocal, you want it to stay there. Okay, so turn your autofocus off, or if you're not on autofocus, leave it on manual. The thing about hyperfocal is that what it gives you is a focal range from half the distance to your lens, to the hyperfocal. From this arrow on out to infinity, everything is in apparent focus, which is what you want. Okay, so once you get your focus dialed in, the next thing you'll do is you'll start putting on your filters. Okay, this is a Nisi filter system that Francesco Gola used in his video, which I've adopted. And the reason I did is because if you start stacking circular ND filters on for these long exposures, they get rather bulky, and you start getting vignetting on the edge of your stack, because they get pretty far away from the lens. So what I do instead is I use this rack system, and this is a circular polarizer which goes onto your lens. It screws on just like most circular polarizers do. The difference is it has a lip on the edge of it, which when you pull this pin out on this, you can put this rack over your polarizer, and it locks down. And then you have this rack with these all these different slots out here you can put filters in. Okay, so what you want to do then is the next step is you want to take a graduated neutral density filter, and so this up here is it's neutral density down to, it's 3 stops of neutral density for this graduated one. And then it has a graduated zone here, kind of a feathered zone for your horizon line, and then this is clear. And so the reason you use this G and D filter on here is because you're looking right at the sun when you're photographing. That sky is going to be pretty bright relative to the land or the sea, so you're equalizing the two. And as a starting place, you have to do that. So this G and D goes in the second slot. It's really important. It's not number 1, it's number 2. Really important. Okay, you'll understand why in a minute. But once you get that whole system together, you have 1.5 stops of ND in this, 3 stops here. You're at 4.5 stops of light reduction on your shot already. But that doesn't mean you can't see what's going on in your live view, and you can. So next I go for the exposure, and I use this little thing right here, and when you click into it, you go ahead and get your exposure with the filter rack on there. And so that it's set up the way you should have it for a correct exposure. And then you note, I always use f11 for these. My ISO is always 100 because that's my native ISO on my Sony a7R4. And then this is the key. You got to figure out what your shutter speed is, right? And we want to shoot for 2 minutes. This is your goal right here. And the way this works is once you figure out your exposure with the 4.5 stops of light reduction, you put those settings in here, your f11 and your ISO 100, and then this is your variable that you can change, is the amount of stops you're going to put in. And so what you do is you go to the next page, and you have this rolling system here where you can put different stops of light reduction in. And as you do that, you'll see this number down here change. Okay, and again, this is your target. You're trying to get that out to 2 minutes. So when I did that, I ended up with 6.25 stops of neutral density filter needed to get an equivalent exposure to this when you're shooting at that shutter speed. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so I knew I needed 6 stops of ND to get to that. Okay, so then once you know that, you can grab an ND out of your kit, and this again is 6 stops of ND according to the need, and this little filter goes in between the GND and the rack, so it goes in the first slot. Okay, really important. And the reason is it has a cork seal on the back, so that when you slide it down in that first slot, it totally seals off the light. You got a nice tight little sandwich system to shoot this. Once you add this ND, you will not be able to see anything out of here. You're out at 10.5 stops of neutral density light reduction, so everything goes black. It's okay. You already figured it for a minute 54, and you're going to get a great exposure. So you just have to trust the system at that point. It's like flying by instruments in clouds. Uh, Very technical, but it works, and it's beautiful when you get it done. So knowing that we needed a minute 54 of time, you somehow have to time it because your camera only goes to 30 seconds. So you set your camera on bulb, and you need a timer of some sort. I use my iPhone. I go to it's like a little pull-down menu in the front of your iPhone, and you can come up with a timer. And I set it for a minute 54, and when you hit that, it'll set an alarm. So when this is done, it'll actually give you an audible alarm, which is kind of cool because people are forever talking to you when you're doing this. And it's nice to have an alarm to tell you to release the shutter button. So, okay, so I'm set up out here in the bay. I've got the tripod set up right here. I'm shooting with the rising sun. I use a Bluetooth remote to hold the shutter button down so that shutter is open for the time. I've got my iPhone on the other hand, and it's timing out that 2 minutes. And at this point, it's really fun because you can just really just sit back and just relax. I actually drink coffee. I hold the two things in one hand and the coffee in the other, and I just drink coffee and I enjoy the sunrise and nature. And as I said, there were terns and seagulls flying overhead. I don't know if they thought I was going to throw them a fish or something or what. I don't know. But they kind of hung out while I was doing this. But you can just enjoy nature. And then as that iPhone approaches 2 minutes and it hits that time, you just release that shutter on the Bluetooth remote. Your exposure is done, and you end up with this gorgeous soft water, really pretty soft water. You can see how soft it is in here. And your clouds, whereas you had to tell just looking at it, now are very soft and they're streaking. Gives you a whole different artistic look than if you shot it normally. Now, I knew these trees over here were going to be a problem because 2 minutes is obviously going to have some issues because of the wind. But I just cloned them out and I ended up with the finished photo, which looked like this. And again, I want you to notice the juxtaposition of real soft, streaking soft, and then you have all this detail. I mean, look at the barnacles on here. It's just so beautiful to see the juxtaposition of real sharp for things that are not moving in the frame to the softness of the things that are. It's just a different look. And just to show you the difference in how artistic this thing leans compared to a normal shot, this would be the difference. And I hope you feel the same wow that I felt when I saw this. When I was putting the slide presentation together. This is quite a difference in impact, I think. What you'll generally get as far as impressions from people is they're drawn into it. They see this police tape they put on here because it's private property, kind of blowing in the breeze. You see this bow line kind of moving down here with the wind. You see these houses real sharp back here, and really sharp detail in the boat. And it just draws people in, and it gives them a feeling of tranquility that you don't have when nature's kind of chaotic a lot of times with the wind and the waves and so forth. It gives you a whole different feeling over here, which is that emotion that they feel is what causes them to respond. So that's long exposure, very long exposure photography. I hope you found it useful, and I hope you'll get a chance to check out Francesco Gola's masterclass on photopills with Raphael Pons, the Bard. And thanks so much for tuning in today. I really appreciate it, and we'll catch you on the next session. Thanks so much. Take care.